If you're looking to build a small kitchen table, something like this, follow along. I'm gonna show you step by step on how to make this from basically starting with rough lumber all the way to the process of just before you sand. So sanding and finishing is gonna be in a separate video, but if you wanna see how to make a table like this one, follow along and I'm gonna show you step by step. First thing we're gonna do is pick out our boards for the top. So my boards right now, I have them all come surface 2 sides. They all come in at about 15/16, and I want it to be as thick as possible. So I'm not gonna run them through the planer this time. However, I'm gonna be looking through to try to find boards that do not have defects and that are gonna look good for a tabletop. Next thing we're gonna do is cut them down on the table saw. I need to have a 4-inch final width, so I'm gonna cut them to 4 1/8, so that way I can get them rough cut and then take them over to the joiner to get a nice finish. Now that we have our boards cut to 4 1/8, now we're gonna cut them to length. Now, we are gonna be gluing this countertop up, so when I cut them to length, I'm leaving an extra 2 inches overall on my size, so that way I can glue everything together and I can cut it all off and be safe with not having to worry about things being off and having to cut it too small. One real quick side note as well, before you start cutting things in your shop, make sure everything is square, and big thing, make sure that your blades are sharp. That's gonna make everything so much easier, so much smoother, and it's gonna save you a ton of time on the back end when it comes to sanding, finishing, and all of that stuff. So take care of that stuff up front, it's gonna save you a ton of time on the back end. Our boards are cut, so now what I need to do is lay out my top and make sure it looks kind of how I want it to look. So that means that I'm not gonna be taking the boards that were all like part of the same board and putting them next to each other and having it segmented and look like basically 3 different boards were glued together. I'm gonna try to arrange them in a way that looks nice. So one other key when you're gluing boards up, it is very important to look at the end grain and kind of see how your rings go. So I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it in the camera, but these rings go in a direction like this, kind of like that. This one is the same thing. The rings are going in this direction. When you are gluing boards up, you do not want them to go in the same formation. You want to rotate them and have them go opposite. Now that is going to make sure that your boards are staying flat over time, because the boards will be fighting against each other. If you can alternate them back and forth, it's going to prevent that, and it's going to make sure that your project lasts much, much longer. So once I have these all figured out, I'm going to lay them out and make sure they're exactly how I want them, make sure all of the rings are pointed in the direction that I want, and I'm going to get them ready for the jointer. So what I do, this is something I learned when I was like 16 or 17 from a cabinet maker, I'm going to draw basically an arc across all of the boards. This is going to be how I know what order they go in, because that line is going to match up. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write on every single board, I'm going to write on the first board I, second board O, I, O, I, O, I, O, all the way across. Easy way to remember that, I, O, off to work I go. You're going to do that all the way across. Now, what that stands for is in, out, in, out. For on the joiner, you want to alternate the direction you're putting them. That way, if your joiner is not perfectly square, this is going to make up for that. Because if your angle is off a little bit, and then you reverse it and put it the other way, they're going to lock together and be perfectly flat and perfectly square. So that is a way to get it all around, having something not be perfect, and it kind of works out really, really well. So that is what I recommend doing if you're gluing up boards. Do the I-O method, and it makes it a lot cleaner and a lot nicer looking. All right, our boards are all labeled and ready to go, so let's start joining. Now that we have all the boards jointed, I'm going to be putting a bevel on the edges, so that way when the glue up happens, it's going to look nice and it's going to be something a little unique for our table. So you can kind of see what it's going to look like with the bevels in between each of the boards. All right, last step before finally gluing up. I need to make sure that my boards are as flat as possible. Since I have that bevel in there, there's not gonna be a lot of room for going through and running it through a sander or planing it or anything like that. So I'm gonna be using a biscuit jointer to try to keep everything flat as can be during glue up. So I already went through and drew lines all the way across. I use my level just to get a straight line to go all the way through. I'm doing 4 biscuits on each joint, and that's gonna help it so it doesn't wave too much, and it should turn out pretty good. Now, there are other tools that you can use, such as dowels, and there are other just devices that you can use that are similar to a biscuit jointer. This is just what I happen to have, and it's going to work out perfectly fine. It is finally time to glue up the top. So we're going to need some glue, we're going to need a wet rag, and we're going to need our biscuits. So I have all my boards kind of laid out in a way where I'm gonna be able to grab them and kind of maneuver them pretty easily. My clamps are laid out. I'm gonna be doing this with 3 clamps, 2 on the bottom, 1 on the top. We're gonna be doing that just to make sure that we don't put too much pressure on the bottom and kind of send them flying up in the air like 52 card pickup. So I'm gonna start with putting glue on these boards, and I'm gonna try to make sure I get it into all of the biscuit holes and kind of maintaining not putting too much glue so that way it comes up into that beveled edge. But that is also why we have the wet rag. So we're gonna start by getting the glue on all of these joints and put them together one by one. Now you're gonna wanna make sure you do get glue on the other sides of the biscuit joints as well. It's very easy to kind of just go right past it and not get glue there. So make sure you do that, drop the biscuits in. And we're gonna do basically a couple boards at a time and start laying them out. All right, I have glue in all the joints. I have the clamps a little bit snug right now, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get the first 2 that are on the bottom, I'm gonna tighten them down a little bit. I'm not gonna go crazy, because again, I don't want it to turn into 52 card pickup. So we're gonna get them snug. I want glue to start oozing out. It's gonna be a lot easier to clean up some of that glue right now versus that other clamp being on there and being in the way. So I'm gonna start snugging them up. And I don't think you can see it in the camera, but the glue is all starting to ooze out. So I'm gonna kind of just inspect the joints, make sure things are starting to come tight. Make sure things are lined up how I want them to be on the ends. Looks like that's pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna tighten them a little bit more. And then at least in the middle is really where my biggest concern is right now. I wanna try to get that glue out of there, because that's where this clamp is gonna go. And I don't want glue to be in there, because it's gonna be really hard to clean this up if there is glue in there after the glue up. So you don't have to go crazy with the clamps. You just want to pull everything tight. You want to make sure your joints look good. And then you're gonna go back through and start getting the rest of the glue out of these joints. All right, so we have the tabletop all glued up. I have that on the side. It's sitting up with the glue being able to run up and down on the boards. I always do it that way. I don't know if that's what other people do, but that's kind of how I do it. So I'm gonna let that sit overnight. Again, that's one of those things that people kind of debate. Like some people will glue it up for an hour and they'll start machining it and it works for them. I just let it cure overnight. That way I know everything is perfect. I don't have to redo anything. I never have to redo anything because it sits overnight and it's 100% dry. So now that that is done, we're gonna start building the legs. So legs are gonna be 2.5 by 2.5. Now the easiest way would be to get wood that is thick enough to accommodate that. I don't have that. I have a bunch of wood that is about 15/16. So I'm gonna glue that stuff up together and basically machine it right from there. So the legs are gonna be pretty easy. They're all gonna be just kind of square legs, nothing too complicated, but we gotta glue the legs up, so we're gonna start with that, get them all glued up and ready to go. So to make these 2.5 by 2.5, I'm gonna start by cutting them 3 inches wide, and I'm gonna glue 3 boards together. That's gonna be about, end up about 3 inches by 3 1/4-ish. That's gonna give me enough room to start machining it all down and to get it to look nice once it does get to that 2.5 by 2.5. All right, so I have all the boards cut up to the width. Now we're gonna cut them to a rough length. I say rough because again, we are gluing these up, so we need to make them longer. So in this case, I'm gonna be making the legs 29 1/4 for the finished size. So I'm gonna be cutting them to 31 inches. That's gonna give me a little over an inch, almost 2 inches to play with as I'm gluing them up. So let's start cutting them up and getting them laid. This is what it's gonna roughly look like before I glue it together. And now I'm gonna keep the boards that are all part of one together. So I really only needed 4 boards that are 3 inches wide to make my 4 legs. It works out perfect. And just like that, it's time to start gluing up wood again. So we're gonna start gluing up these legs. Now I already went through and kind of make sure they're in the order that I wanted them. If there's any defects, you wanna just hide that right in the middle, just bury it right there, and put your best ones on the outside. Now with these, you're gonna wanna make sure you get really good glue coverage. The glue will ooze and move all over the place. You can either use a brush or you can kind of be diligent about making sure you just get the glue spread out all over the place as you're applying it. There's much better brushes out there than this. I have one. I have no idea where it is. I moved into this shop like, I don't know, a month and a half ago. It's here somewhere. I just don't know where. And I don't use it very often, so I don't really care that much to find it. So I'm just gonna kind of use this and kind of just brush it like I'm painting, try to get really good coverage on the whole thing. And again, the glue is gonna spread out. This brush really sucks to use. I would not recommend using this brush. Get that board on there, line it up, and same thing all over again. And again, and again, and again. I'm gonna put all 4 of the legs in one set of clamps. I'm gonna do 4 clamps on the bottom, and then I'll do 2 clamps on the top. And that should create enough pressure to hold these legs together. And then again, I'm gonna let it sit overnight with the top. All right, after about 10 years, I finally have glue on everything. So now I'm just gonna kind of line up all the boards. Make sure you don't put glue in between each leg. You don't need this to be one big ass block. Just every 3 boards, glue them together. Don't put glue in between. They should all come apart, no problem. All right, so don't screw that up. That would just be a silly mistake. So I'm gonna get everything lined up, get my clamps tightened. Now again, I'm gonna snug the bottom ones first just so I can kind of see how everything looks before I add in more clamps on top. Now you don't need 500 clamps on here. There's not room for that many clamps. You definitely don't need it, but you want to kind of go through, take a look. You can use different hammers to kind of get everything pounded flat. So like if this hammer doesn't work, then I'd go and get a real hammer with a piece of wood, but I just need it close. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'll get it jointed to get it flat. I have about an extra ½ inch or so to play with, so I don't need it to be perfect. It just makes it easier down the road the closer I get it. So again, pound it, snug it. Now we're going to complicate things by adding in the other clamps. Clamps are going to have to dance around each other since the little twisty things are going to hit each other. I don't know why the heck that word is not coming to my mind right now, but you know what I'm talking about. Handle, that's the word, the handle. All right, we're gonna let this sit up overnight, and tomorrow we'll finish this table. All of our boards are glued up, everything is ready to go. So next step, I'm gonna be working on the top. For this, I need to get a straight edge on one of the ends, so that way I can glue up some boards on both sides. So I need to get a straight edge on one end, and then I'm gonna cut it on the table saw to get it to the final width. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'm gonna show you. So first step, I need to flip my top upside down. Since I'm gonna be cutting with a circular saw, the blades kind of pull upward, so you're gonna get like basically not as nice of an edge. So that's the first thing, is flip the board upside down. Next thing, I need to use my square to get a straight edge as to where I am going to be cutting it. So I'm gonna do that, draw my lines, and then we're gonna start cutting with the circular saw. Well, that barely made it through. Now that we were able to get that cut with the circular saw, I'm gonna take it over to the table saw and cut it to length. And then from there, we're gonna be sticking on some boards on the end. All right, it looks like everything is square. Next thing I'm gonna do is be cutting these boards that are gonna be going on the end. Now that is going to basically kind of block off the chamfers that are in here and just kind of make it have a nice finished look. So I'm gonna cut those to length. I already have those boards cut because those are the 4-inch boards that I cut that went along with the ones that are currently on here. So let's get this to length. So we need just over 36.5. We're gonna cut 2 of those and get them all attached. All right, so the boards are all cut up, and you can kind of see what the configuration is going to be with the wood of how it's all going to be laid out. So now that I have these on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to use biscuits to get everything lined up and perfectly flat and get it all glued up. All right, biscuits are all cut. Next thing I'm gonna do is get everything glued up. One thing I'm gonna be doing different this time than last time, I'm gonna take a scrap board and put it in between the clamps and the actual top. I'm gonna do that to kind of save the basically the outside of the top from the clamp pressure of like damaging everything, because this is going to be the final width and final length. So I don't want to have to go back and go through the joiner, go through the table saw, any of that stuff after this is all glued up. So I'm going to do this to kind of save the edges and make sure nothing gets damaged. All right, this is all glued up, ready to go. I'm going to wipe it off with a wet rag for all the glue, and then we're going to set it on the side and start working on the legs. Now that we have the tabletop in its final glue up, I'm going to start working on the legs again. First thing I need to do after the glue up is run up to the joiner and get a nice flat edge. Now that I'm done running it through the joiner, we're going to pull the planer out, start running them through the planer, and get them to the final size. All right, now that the legs are all to the final width, we are going to take it over to the chop saw and get them cut to length. Last thing we're going to do to the legs, put a slight bevel on the very bottom of the legs. Now you can do this a few different ways. You can do it on the table saw, set up a jig, and have a nice long bevel that kind of carries up the leg. I want it to be just on the very bottom, just to add enough of a decorative touch where you kind of notice it, but nothing that really sticks out that makes it be like, wow, that's what I'm looking at. Because I really want the top to be the focal point, but this is just going to make it so it doesn't look like a standard straight leg. All right, so my legs are completely finished. They are square, they have the bevel on the end. Now we need to make the curtain that connects them all. I'm gonna pocket screw those into the legs, and I'm gonna put pocket screws going up that's gonna connect the top. For the skirts, I'm gonna make them 2.5 inches wide by 29 inches long, and they're gonna get screwed together in between the legs. Boards are all cut to width and length. Now it's time to put in the pocket holes. All right, now that I have the skirt all ready to go, I'm gonna start attaching that to the legs. So this part's gonna be a little tricky. I'm gonna have it be offset on the inside about 1/2 inch. You need to make sure that the pocket holes are all going in the correct direction, because otherwise you're gonna have to take it apart after the fact once you realize you can't screw it into the top. So we're gonna put a little bit of glue on there. I'm gonna use my square to get it all lined up. At least get it close. I'll be able to knock it around with the hammer once I get it clamped up. So get that close. I'm gonna use this clamp. I don't use this clamp very often, but this is the perfect scenario in which this clamp works out and makes sense to use. All right, so get that clamped. Now we're going to make sure that it is perfectly straight, which it's not, so I need to pound it around a little bit. Make sure it's flush on the top, and now we're gonna screw it in. Now for screwing this in, I'm gonna be using 1 1/4 pocket screws with the fine thread. I like using fine thread when going into hardwoods and coarse thread when going into plywood, particle board, things like that. All right, so now that we have the legs and skirts all attached, we're gonna wanna make sure that everything is square. So I'm gonna look across, looks like 49 1/4 by 49 and just over a quarter. So I'll bump that around, get that all square. That way when the glue dries, everything is perfect where it needs to be. We're gonna let the top finish gluing up, and then as soon as that is all dry, we're gonna put this all together and you're gonna see what it looks like prior to stain and finish. So the last step to building this table is to screw this top onto the legs and to the frame, and then you are ready to go. So I'm not gonna do the whole process of sanding, staining, and finishing in this video. I'm gonna make a completely separate video for that just because that is gonna be a long video in itself. So if you do have any questions about the process of building this table, let me know. Otherwise, please make sure that you subscribe, like, and share. I greatly appreciate you watching, and we will see you next time. Thank you.